bit. But keeping along this theme, I want to drive into a riding here, I guess literally and figuratively, because I did drive through the riding on Friday, that has been one of the fascinating ones, and it's called Banff-Airdrie, and this is a crowded field. You have the major parties, of course, all running candidates. Then you've also got the People's Party, the Maverick Party. You have Derek Sloan running as an independent. You also have two others that are running as independents. So I think you've got 9 candidates in total that are in this riding, and many of them are taking very conservative positions. The incumbent is a conservative by the name of Blake Richards, and I reached out to Blake Richards numerous times, tried to get him to do an interview, and it would not even give me the courtesy of a reply. So take from that what you will. But I am interested in this riding because it's a riding where a conservative voter has more choice than anywhere else in the country. And I spoke to a couple of the candidates who are vying for that seat. One of them is Nadine Wellwood, who is the People's Party candidate there. Here's a bit of our chat. So who are you and what are you doing? What are you running for?
Who am I? Nadine Wellwood, People's Party of Canada candidate for Banff-Airdrie. And what am I doing? I asked myself that many times. We needed a change. We have to have somebody who's going to defend our freedoms and our rights. I'm a chartered investment manager. Every time I listen to Trudeau sing, Aaron O'Toole make more promises with money we don't have, it just hurts me. So we have to get back to less government, not more, and decided that in 2019 I understood the direction that Canada was headed in and got involved. When I heard Maxime speak, I just kind of went, I called him my unicorn of politics, because I went, this guy's a politician. He doesn't sound like a politician. He's not speaking like a politician. Common sense was prevailing. And, here I am again in 2021 doing it all over, and with a much bigger reception this time around, as people, I think, realize that Canada is at a crossroads.
Well, let me ask you about that, because in 2019, the PPC was new. Maxime Bernier had a fair bit of momentum. I think there was a lot of curiosity about what this party was going to be, and the result of it was Maxime losing his seat and the party getting, I think, 1.6% of the votes. So 1.2%. All right, an honest politician then. But why do you think it's different 2 years later sufficiently that things could turn? And again, I should preface that by saying we are seeing in the polls much higher support for PPC, but I'm curious about why 2 years later that is different, you think?
Well, for one, we're not a new party anymore. People have and are hearing about us again and again. For two, Max has been out on the road all throughout Canada and promoting the no more lockdowns, and fighting for individuals' rights and freedoms. So people, I think, are beginning to understand this is not about politics. There's something much bigger at play here. And, right now, this election is not about NDP. It's not about Conservative. It's not about Liberal. It's not about the Green Party. The PPC is consolidating all of the votes across Canada, people who want to maintain what made Canada great, what makes us great, and that's our individual rights and freedoms. I mean, if you look at John Diefenbaker, the Honorable John Diefenbaker, in 1960, he delivered one of the most powerful speeches. I am Canadian. I'm not afraid. And that's what we're up against today. We have every politician, Aaron O'Toole, every leader of every mainstream party that has said, you don't have the right to make the choice, your own medical choices. And Max is the only one that's standing up against that. And we are consolidating votes all across the country, not just the West, not just the East, the entire country, based upon values, based upon principles, common sense principles. And people are relating to that.
I think in 2019, there was a perception of the People's Party that it was this sort of ultra-conservative splinter from the Conservative Party of Canada. And obviously, Maxime Bernier has used the line that the Conservative Party of Canada isn't a conservative party anymore. But the coalition seems to be very different this time around. And I think you can see that in the polling numbers. Conservatives are leading the polls in a lot of cases, but PPC is still managing to get, 10, 11, 12% in some cases, certainly when you look in Alberta. Where is that support coming from? Because it can't just be from right of center voters.
No, it's not. It's values based. It's principle based. So people this time around understand that this is not an election of, Justin Trudeau or Erin O'Toole. This is an election of whether or not we choose to live in a free country or you're going to choose to live under a totalitarian government. And that's the part that is rallying, I think, our numbers. We're uniting people from across all political spectrums. That's the beauty of this. Whereas Justin Trudeau and Erin O'Toole saying they're all trying to divide the country into vaccinated, unvaccinated, East versus West. And the PPC has said, we're not going to do that. We stand for values, we stand for principles. The founding principles of Canadian values, freedom, fairness, respect, and responsibility. And that's what people are attracted to, and that's what people are coming, in support of.
One of the reasons I'm interested in Banff-Airdrie as a riding is because of just how many choices voters have here. It's getting a little bit crazy. You've not just got the Conservative Party, the Liberal, the NDP, the PPC, you've got the Maverick Party, you've got, I think, 3 independents, including one who's fairly high profile within the Conservative movement, and that's Derek Sloan. First off, why has Banff-Airdrie just become this clown car of candidates, to use a semi-pejorative term?
I think there's a number of reasons. Derek Sloan parachuted his way in here from Ontario. He has 1 foot in Ontario still with his wife running in his old riding. He abandoned his constituents there because he didn't feel he could win. And, he's here to use Albertans and the Albertan Conservative vote. And he has a personal vendetta, and he has said this himself on a number of interviews. He has a personal vendetta with Blake Richards. And I agree, Blake Richards has to go. He has offered no value to this riding. He's running for a 5th term. What more does he have to offer? What can he contribute from here? Very little. Very little. And he's the whip. So not only has he taken the voice away from Banff-Airdrie constituents and residents, but he's the one responsible for silencing our other 33 MPs, Albertan MPs. And, we only get 34 seats. That's it. That's all Alberta gets. And we were already complaining about not getting enough representation. And Derek Sloan comes to take one. I was very clear in my response to Derek Sloan and his announcement. People say I was a bit harsh. No, it wasn't. It really wasn't. I'm not going to stand by as an Albertan of 16 years. I've raised my family here. My husband is born and raised in Calgary. This is my home. This is my family. And I'm not going to allow anybody from Ontario come in and say, oh, well, I'm here to save you, step aside. So he underestimated, I think, the strength of Albertans and the grit we actually have. But yeah, he has a personal vendetta with Blake Richards. It's all about Derek Sloan, regrettably, and he'll have to answer for that in day 34. If he costs, somebody like myself, for example, the opportunity to have uprooted Blake Richards.
Now, when you talk about an Ontarian coming in and taking something from Alberta, or trying to speak for Albertans, certainly something we've seen in Canadian politics time and time again, the Maverick Party makes the same claim about the PPC, that at the end of the day, your leader, Maxime Bernier, is a Quebecer, not someone who's going to be looking out for the Western interests. So what is your response to that?
Jay Hill's from BC. What does BC have to do in common, anything in common? So let's take a look at the Lower Mainland in BC. What does that have to do anything in common with Alberta, rural Alberta? Absolutely nothing, right? I am not. So this is the thing. Max props me up. Max supports me. Max comes here and says, Nadine, you're on the stage. We stand side by side, right? And he supports that. He's supporting his candidates. He's not here promoting himself necessarily as the leader. Of course he is. He's the leader of the party, but he's not, he doesn't take all the limelight. Right? He's propping up the Alberta, and he says, I asked him, I said, Max, you going to silence me? In our video, Max is like, good luck with that. No, of course not. He gives his MPs the freedom to speak. I can sit here and have whatever conversation I want with you. Max doesn't need to vet it. He doesn't have to approve it. As long as I agree with freedom, fairness, respect, and responsibility, he understands that, MPs have the right to represent their constituents and their province first. And that's what I will do. So the Maverick Party, regrettably, they're dividing the country. East versus West. The issues as they relate specifically to this election are not East versus West issues. Some of the most strict lockdowns occurred in the East, Ontario and Quebec. And what the PPC again is doing is we are uniting all those voices across the country. And we are bringing everybody together. Why would we alienate friends that we have in Eastern Canada or the Atlantic Canada or the Maritimes or in BC? So that's the big difference. And for me, I'm not a Western MP. I have nothing in common with the lower mainland of BC. I'm here to represent my constituents. I'm here to represent my province. And then everything else comes thereafter.
One of the challenges in being a new party, being a young party, is that the opportunities to get your message out aren't there. We look at this week, of course, Maxime Bernier being excluded from the leaders' debate. He's also running as an outsider at the same time. And in some cases, it may be entirely possible that not being in the debate works out better for him. But I'm curious if you're finding people are actually aware of the PPC, or if you're having to, when you go knocking on doors, introduce this party and this idea to them.
Yeah, there's not as much. We're seeing more and more support. I have people coming to find me, which that didn't happen the last time around. So I'd say there's still probably about 30-40% of people who have not heard of the PPC, which is probably our biggest challenge. Because once we have an opportunity to speak to people and they see our platform, CBC, for example, and their little clip that they did, they're sitting there and they're talking to people, and the one gentleman, he's a veteran, looking at our platform, and he's like, yes, yes, yes. It's kind of hard to disagree with freedom, fairness, respect, and responsibility. It's hard to disagree with giving people the right to make their own medical choices. It's hard to disagree with fiscal responsibility. We can kill this country one of two ways. The first is to destroy its freedoms, and that's the destruction of democracy very quickly. The other one is the destruction of fiscal responsibility. And if you look at even Aaron O'Toole, who's going to print another $100 billion and spend $100 billion in the next 10 years, and then he claims he can balance the budget after that without making any cutting any expenses. I sit here as a chartered investment manager, and it just baffles me. It's like, explain that to me, because there's revenues and there's expenses. So if you're not going to cut expenses, then what you're saying is you're going to increase taxes, or you're going to continue to print money. Well, printing money is the cause of inflation. So you have 31% increase right now in food expenses. You have fuel gone up because of carbon taxes. You've got housing. Housing is you could cut 20 to 40% of housing costs tomorrow by getting the government out of the way. None of them are proposing smaller, less government. Government is the biggest expense to Canadians. So let's cut it. Let's cut it. And that's how we get back to affordable living.
You mentioned earlier the possibility that, Derek Sloan, as one example, could split enough votes from you that it cost you the chance to take down Blake Richards. With so many candidates here, vote splitting is a very real concern beyond what it could be in other ridings. And I'm curious what the nightmare scenario for you is here. Is it that the anti-Blake Richards vote is split and Blake Richards loses? Or is it that the Conservative vote is split and something really crazy happens in Banff-Airdrie, which is the election of an NDP or a Liberal?
Yeah, I don't see the election of an NDP or a Liberal here. They did get 10% and 11% respectively in the last election, and I don't think the candidates here are strong, to be honest. So, I think people in Alberta are pretty angry and upset with, the socialist ideology, especially with the Liberal and the Conservative. I think people have a hard time realizing that Aaron O'Toole shares that same ideology, and I think that's just more, deliberate willingness to overlook, because they want to think that the Conservative Party is still conservative. But in reality, seeing a Liberal or a Conservative or an NDP get into this riding, Blake had 71% of the vote. So the bigger concern is it would have been nicer to have the People's Party of Canada. We now are polling at 19% in Alberta. Like I said to you earlier, for example, with Derek Sloan, if I were to collect, let's say 28% of the vote, and Derek Sloan collects 8, that's 36%. That's, half plus 1, and Blake Richards would have been out. He's the one that will have to answer to Albertans for having cost them their opportunity to have a strong voice in Ottawa.
That was Nadine Wellwood, one of the candidates in the very crowded riding of Banff-Airdrie, specifically the People's Party candidate.